Hello and welcome back to Weston the Historian. Today I will be covering the Six-Day War. As its name implies, the Six-Day War was a war that lasted only 6 days. It was between Israel and several bordering Arab nations. Despite Israel being outmatched, Israel stood victorious over their enemies after this very short conflict. First, we have to talk about the background. Before the war started, Palestinian groups based in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan started conducting guerrilla attacks against Israel. In 1966, Israel conducted an airstrike on Al-Samu, I believe it's pronounced that way, leaving 18 dead and 54 wounded. Later, during an air battle with Syria in 1967, Israel shot down 6 Syrian planes. Soviet intelligence also reported that Israel was planning to invade Syria, leading to even worse tensions between Israel and their neighbors. Now, this report was not factual, but it still led to tensions. The president of Egypt at the time, Gamal Abdel Nasser, I believe it's pronounced that way, I could be completely wrong, began vigorously supporting Syria. On May 14th, he started to station troops in the Sinai Peninsula. 4 days later, he asked the United Nations to take the emergency forces out of the Sinai. On May 22nd, he closed the Gulf of Aqaba, I believe it's pronounced that way. Sorry about if I have any mispronunciation, sorry about them. He closed the Gulf of Aqaba to Israeli trade, effectively blockading Israel. 8 days later, King Hussein of Jordan signed a mutual defense pact with Egypt, and Iraq joined shortly afterward. So here is now the war. In response, Israel staged an air assault that destroyed 90% of all Egyptian air forces on June 5th. They did something very similar on the same day to Syria. All of this led the Egyptian army vulnerable, as they had no air force to cover the sky for them. Within 3 days, Israel had achieved almost complete victory on the ground. They had captured the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula. On that same day, Jordan began shelling West Jerusalem, leading the Israelis to drive them out 2 days later. The United Nations called for a ceasefire on June 7th, which was immediately accepted by Israel and Jordan. On June 8th, Israel accepted. Egypt. So sorry. Syria refused to accept and continued bombarding Israeli villages. The next day, Israel assaulted Golan Heights, capturing it from Syrian forces after heavy fighting. Syria accepted the ceasefire on June 10th. The war left 11,000 Egyptians dead, 6,000 Jordanians dead, and 1,000 Syrians dead. And Israel, 700 dead. 18,000 Arabs and 700 Israelis. Those were the casualties. The Arab army suffered a loss of equipment, and the political elites in Arab countries were seen as failures. Nasser resigned, but many still wanted him to remain in office. The Six-Day War also led to over 1 million Palestinians coming under Israeli rule and the calling for a two-state resolution. So, many of its effects can still be felt today. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe.